Since at least March the 15th, our days, now turning into weeks, have been restructured. I got thinking about what my week leading up to March 15th looked like. On Monday and Wednesday of that week, I started my day by doing something I had been doing for about the past 18 months, driving for Uber. My routine was I would get up early, somewhere around 5:30 a.m., and I would turn on my Uber driver app by 6:30 a.m. and wait for the first ping, which, when I accepted it, gave me step-by-step directions where to go to pick up my passenger. On those days that I gave rides until time to go to the church at 9 a.m. I remember my final Uber ride on Wednesday of that week was a gentleman I got to know, as on several occasions I took him to work all the way from Williamston to the Bilo on Highway 24 in Anderson. And along the way we would have some very good conversations. And I suddenly realized how much I missed seeing JP and several other of my regular Uber riders that I had gotten to know. On Monday of that week, leading up to March 15th, I joined together at lunchtime with some ministerial friends for conversation and support and our sharing together in a book that we were reading. That has been a part of my Monday routine for now about 3 years. The rest of Monday, for me, involved our routine here, which would be Monday devotional at 4:15, followed by our community dinner, and then choir practice. Tuesday of that week leading up to March 15th was a hard day. That morning, Jean and I took our beloved Honey, our Brittany Spaniel. We took her to the vet as her health had declined. At age 14, she'd reached the end of her quality dog life days. And we shed our tears as she crossed the Rainbow Bridge. I spent the rest of that day at home. Those of you who have animals in your family, you know how much that sort of thing takes out of you. We did, in the late afternoon of that day, drive to Hannah High School, where we picked up Olivia, our granddaughter. A task that now seems so distant in many ways and so very precious. On Wednesday of that week, we gathered in this room for our noon prayer service. If you have never been here on a Wednesday, it is every bit as special as Sunday mornings. To me, what is so remarkable about Wednesday prayer time is that here we are, people who our very being together is so unlikely, sharing from our hearts the concerns of our lives. Again, something so precious, I will never take it for granted. And of course, we ate afterwards. We always eat here, right? That Wednesday was my favorite Chef Kevin meal, Mexican meatloaf. And after lunch, upstairs in the art room, the art class took brush to canvas and did more of that holy sharing of their lives that in the early church Greek language is called koinonia. By Thursday of that week, the news about coronavirus had started to build up a level of concern in me that when I got to the church that morning, I asked Elizabeth and Jenny on our staff that we keep the doors unopened until about 10 so that we could have some time to talk about how we might change some things. We decided that day to suspend our in-dining room meals and to distribute our food as carry-out, something we had hoped never our meals to become. On Friday of that week, March 13th, I spend a good part of the day arranging and facilitating the pickup and delivery of our beautiful new piano here at the church. A love for music has always been a key part of my life, but again, the sounds produced by the strings of the piano activated by hands on the keys and the sounds of the human voice raised in song have taken on an even greater sense of preciousness to me. It bothered me when on Friday of this past week our governor decided bookstores and music stores were non-essential while keeping liquor stores and gun stores open. I think there's something certainly wrong with that. On Saturday of that week leading up to March 15th, Jean and I wrestled with a decision about attending a wedding in Columbia of some dear friends. We've known the groom and his parents and sister since soon after we moved to Anderson some 27 years ago. The news was heightening the alarm about the spread of the virus, and gatherings of no more than 200 were being discouraged then. So what should we do, we asked ourselves. But we could not miss it. We would take our hand sanitizer and our Clorox wipes and we would venture on. And pictures we now have on our Facebook news feed of that beautiful wedding and reception remind us to never take our friends and their lives for granted again. On the way home from that event, I got a text asking me if we were still planning to have worship service the next day. And it was a fair and a good question, and I said yes for now. I knew upon waking Sunday, March 15th, this would be the last Sunday for church people to congregate for worship for a while. The best of hopes was maybe just 2 to 3 weeks and we'd be back together, but I had a sense it could be more, maybe much more. We gathered that morning at South Main. Not as many as usual here, but still a good many were here, and I looked out at the beautiful faces. We didn't do our normal hug fest after the call to worship. We did not gather to eat in our weekly family Sunday dinner here in our dining hall. We passed out the food carry-out. I left here that Sunday thinking, Lord, I will never again take for granted the incredible blessing of coming to church on Sunday. That afternoon, I attended the funeral of Bob Hill, the father-in-law of our staff member, Kevin Byington. It was a moving tribute to a man who lived his life well, served his community, loved his family, and at age 95 went home to be with the Lord. That was the very last public gathering I attended. As we watch the cruel isolation this virus forces upon us, as we watch it keep families from being able to celebrate their loved ones' lives together with friends, again, may God help us to never, never take such actions for granted again. As I scroll back through my memory, recalling the unfolding events of my life, intersecting with the unfolding events of the world of that week, March 9th through the 15th, I got thinking about the unfolding events of the week we pause to remember starting today. A week now known and called Holy Week in the Christian story. It seems it was first called Holy Week as far back as the end of the 3rd century. In historical documents that make the first reference to the recognition of Holy Week, it is said to be a time when, quote, abstinence from flesh is commanded for all the days, while for the Friday and Saturday an absolute fast is commanded. In some circles, it is believed that the Roman Emperor Constantine went even further to close by ordinance all public businesses for the 7 days immediately preceding Easter Day and for the 7 days which followed. In a historical document containing a compilation of laws under the Roman Empire in the 4th century, it explicitly orders that all actions at law should cease and that the doors of all courts of law be closed during those 15 days surrounding Easter Day. Turns out there's a precedence for a shutdown during Holy Week. In some ways it is sad. It's taken us a pandemic virus to wake many of us up to the destructive nature of our fast-paced, compulsively going and doing lives. Turns out, stop and smell the roses, in reality, is more than just a quaint cliche. It's a sound and holy life practice. What happened on those days, those last days of Jesus' life, that first Holy Week? Well, on Sunday, Palm Sunday, here's how Matthew tells it. When they neared Jerusalem, having arrived at Bethphage on Mount Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples with these instructions. Go over to the village across from you, and you'll find a donkey tethered there, her colt with her. Untie her and bring them to me, and if anyone asks what you're doing, say, the Master needs them. He will send them with you. This is the full story of what was sketched earlier by the prophet. Tell Zion's daughter, look, your king is on his way, poised and ready, mounted on a donkey, on a colt, full of a pack animal. The disciples went and did exactly what Jesus told them to do. They led the donkey and the colt out, and they laid some of their clothes on them, and Jesus mounted the donkey. Nearly all the people in the crowd threw their garments down on the road, giving him a royal welcome. Others cut branches from the trees and threw them down as a welcome mat. Crowds went ahead and crowds followed, all of them calling out, Hosanna to David's son! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in highest heaven! As Jesus made his entrance into Jerusalem, the whole city was shaken. Unnerved, people were asking, well, what's going on here? Who is this? And the parade crowd answered, this is the prophet Jesus, the one from Nazareth in Galilee. That was Sunday of that week. Now, what happened the next 3 days, Monday through Wednesday, is not completely clear, but here are some things historians have connected to those days. On Holy Monday, the anointing of Jesus at Bethany, when Mary poured the expensive perfume on Jesus' feet and dried his feet with her hair. It may have also been the day when Jesus drove the money changers out of the temple. On Holy Tuesday, some observed Jesus predicting his own death, as is recorded in John chapter 12 and chapter 13. And on Wednesday, which is often called Spy Wednesday, some observed the story of Judas arranging the betrayal of Jesus with the chief priests. All of these events show Jesus being active, but primarily in small groups. By Thursday of the week, we know that as Jesus' life and message has come to intersect more and more with the tensions of the religious and political authorities, Jesus is spending time now only with his closest friends. He decides to observe the Passover meal with the inner circle of his followers, those whom he has called to be leaders in his movement. Jesus has a strong sense that this will be the last time they will have dinner together, and he tries to tell them about that. Jesus also says to them that he knows that even some of his closest companions will not hang tight with him through the coming days. There will be denial and betrayal by even those who knew him best and loved him most. Sometime later in the evening on that Thursday, we pick up the story in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 26. Then Jesus went with them to a garden called Gethsemane, and he told his disciples, "Stay here while I go over there and pray." Taking along Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he plunged into an agonizing sorrow. Then he said, "This sorrow is crushing my life out. Stay here and keep vigil with me." Going a little ahead, he fell on his face, praying, "My Father, if there is any way, get me out of this. But please, not what I want. Do what you want." When he came back to his disciples, he found them sound asleep. And he said to Peter, "Can't you stick it out with me even a single hour? Stay alert, be in prayer, so you don't wander into temptation without even knowing you're in danger." There's a part of you, Peter, I know that's eager, ready for anything in God, but there's another part that's as lazy as an old dog sleeping by the fire. Jesus then left them a second time. Again, he prayed, "My Father, if there is no other way than this, drinking this cup to the dregs, I'm ready. Do it your way." When he came back, he again found them asleep, and they simply couldn't keep their eyes open. And this time he just let them sleep on and went back a third time to pray, going over the same ground one last time. When he came back the next time, he said, "Are you going to sleep and make a night of it? My time is up. The Son of Man is about to be handed over to the hands of sinners. Get up, let's get going. My betrayer is here." The words were barely out of his mouth when Judas, the one from the 12, showed up, and with him a gang from the high priests and religious leaders brandishing swords and clubs. The betrayer had worked out a sign with them. "The one I kiss, that's the one. Seize him." And Judas went straight to Jesus and greeted him. "How are you, Rabbi?" and kissed him. And Jesus said, "Friend, why this charade?" Then they came on him and they grabbed him and they roughed him up. And one of those with Jesus pulled out his sword and taking a swing at the chief priest's servant cut off his ear. And Jesus said, "Put your sword back where it belongs. All who use swords and are destroyed by swords. Don't you realize that I am able right now to call my Father, and 12 companies more if I want them of fighting angels would be here, battle ready? But if I did that, how would the scriptures come true that say this is the way it has to be?" Then Jesus addressed the mob. "What is this, coming after me with swords and clubs as if I were a dangerous criminal? Day after day I've been sitting in the temple teaching, and you never so much as lifted a hand against me. You've done it this way to confirm and fulfill the prophetic writings." And then all the disciples cut and ran. The gang that seized Jesus led him before Caiaphas, the chief priest, where the religious scholars and leaders had assembled, and Peter followed at a safe distance until they got to the chief priest's courtyard. And then Peter slipped in and mingled with the servants, watching to see how things would turn out. The high priest, conspiring with the Jewish council, tried to cook up charges against Jesus in order to sentence him to death. But even though many stepped up, making up one false accusation after another, nothing was believable. Finally, 2 men came forward with this. "Well, he said, I can tear down this temple of God and after 3 days rebuild it." The chief priest stood up and said, "What do you have to say to this accusation?" Jesus kept silent. Then the chief priest said, "I command you by the authority of the living God to say, if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus was very blunt. "You yourself said it, and that's not all. Soon you'll see it for yourselves." the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Mighty One. At that moment, the chief priest lost his temper, ripping his robe, yelling, "He's blasphemed!